Hello. Before we begin, a quick note. The Boy to Sleep podcast relies on you and sponsors, which means you will hear a quick advertisement before the beginning of tonight's episode. While the podcast is free, you are welcome to subscribe for just $2.99 per month, which supports the creation of this podcast and gives you an ad-free listening experience. Simply click the link in the show notes from your podcast app. Rest easy.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes per detail.
Hello. Welcome to the Bore You to Sleep podcast. The podcast that will hopefully help you get to sleep. I am going to read an open source book, one that is not particularly interesting, but one that is hopefully boring enough to get you to sleep. Tonight's reading comes from A Short History of Belgium, written by Leon van der Essen and published in 1916. This story looks at the history of Belgium and the events that led to its independence. My name is Teddy, and I am to help people everywhere get a good night's rest. Sleep is so important, and my mission is to help you get the rest that you need. The podcast is designed to play in the background while you slowly fall asleep. For those new to the podcast, it started from my own struggles with sleep. I wanted to create a resource for others facing similar challenges, and I am so grateful for the amazing community that we have built together. This podcast is self-made and self-produced, which is why you will hear a short ad at the beginning of each episode. These ads, with the support from subscribers and patrons, enable me to keep delivering this podcast for free to those who need it. Thank you to everyone who shared their words of gratitude with me during the week, whether through the website or their podcast app. Your messages mean the world to me. My goal is to keep this podcast free and accessible to everyone who needs it. That is why I play these short ads. It helps generate financial support for the creation of the podcast. If you find the podcast beneficial and would like to support it, there are a few ways you can contribute. Follow the podcast in your podcast app and leave a comment. Become a subscriber for $2.99 per month. Simply click on the link in the show notes. This removes the Spotify ads and supports episode creation. If subscribing is not possible, an easy way to help is simply by leaving a review in your podcast app. Even one sentence really helps out. If you would like to support the show with a monthly contribution, or simply just say hello, please visit boytosleep.com. In the meantime, lie back, relax, and enjoy the readings. A Short History of Belgium by Leon van der Essen. Introduction. There has been much discussion about the time at which Belgian history should be said to begin. Belgium, as an entirely autonomous, independent kingdom, has only existed since 1830. But the Belgium of 1830 was, in a certain way, a creation of European diplomacy and the result of centuries of struggle for personal and political freedom. Belgium as a country, and the Belgians as a people, existed long before. Since the time of Caesar, 57 BC, history tells us that the Belgians, the bravest of all the people of Gaul, and although the Germanic invasions of the 4th and 5th centuries have added a new ethnical element to the old Belgian stock, it is from the time of the Roman conqueror that the history of the Belgian people really begins. As for Belgium, as a united political body, one must go back to the 15th century, when the Dukes of Burgundy succeeded in unifying all the Belgian duchies and counties under one dynasty. Before that time, Belgium had practically consisted of two very distinct parts, Lotharingia in the east, Flanders in the west, separated by the river Scheldt. Lotharingia was, politically speaking, a part of the medieval German Empire. Flanders was in subjugation to the Kingdom of France. Each succeeded Lotharingia first, then Flanders, in evading the political domination of Germany and France, respectively, and grew closer and closer together during the last centuries of the Middle Ages. That work of union was achieved by the Burgundian dukes, who inherited from the local Lotharingian and Flemish dynasties in the 15th century. But in the Middle Ages, not only did the increasing tendency of union between Lotharingia and Flanders exist, but there was also a strong factor of national union, the common civilization, the common culture of Lotharingia and Flanders. The inhabitants of the different duchies and counties were united by the same religion, the same artistic and economic aims, the same political institutions, although there were, of course, some local differences of minor importance. Since early in the Middle Ages, the Belgian people had possessed a distinctive, though mutually common civilization, and the local differences which existed and which were more or less well defined at the outset disappeared gradually as the different parts of the country drew closer together politically. The history of Belgium and the Belgian people does not begin to date merely from 1830, not even from the 15th century. It dates, in fact, from the time when, during the 5th century, Gallo-Romans and Germanic invaders intermingled and laid the basis of that ethnical and linguistic duality that has been for many centuries the characteristic of the Belgian populace, and has impressed its mark on the whole course of Belgian history. The real unity of the history of Belgium in the ante-modern times has been brought into notice by one of Belgium's leading historians, Henri Perrin, professor in the University of Ghent, in his admirable work, History of Belgium. Before the publication of this work, few scholars understood how to treat the history of Belgium during the Middle Ages. Having in mind only the political aspect of that history, they were lost in the particular history of the various duchies and counties. They saw scarcely any link between the facts of these different historical sections, and they forgot entirely to take account of the unifying factor, the common culture and civilization. Since historians have had their attention called to that unifying factor, the history of Belgium has been looked upon in a different manner. It is in the light of that method that I shall try to explain the course of the historical development of the country. The national culture of Belgium is a synthesis, if I may so call it, where one finds the genius of two races, the Romance and the Germanic, mingled, yet modified by the imprint of the distinctively Belgian. It is in that very receptivity, the fact that it has absorbed and unified the best elements of Latin and Teutonic civilization, that the originality of the Belgian national culture resides. These distinctive marks and national culture, denoting the unity of a people and serving both in the Middle Ages and today, to distinguish the Belgian nation from the other nations of Europe, may be described as a common desire for independence and freedom. In the course of their history, the Belgians have always cast off the yoke of those princes who, like Philip II, Joseph II, and William I of Holland, attacked their liberties and privileges, or who, like Joseph II and William I of Holland, tried to impose their own religious beliefs on them. Those characteristics of the Belgian nation, as well as its common civilization, were born during the Middle Ages. For that reason, I shall deal in a special manner with the different aspects of religious, artistic, literary, and economic life during that period. After the treatment of the political unity of the Belgian provinces achieved in the 15th century, more attention will be given to the political aspect of events, without, however, entirely neglecting the different forms of popular life and social activity. The history of Belgium may be divided into the following periods. 1. The formative period, including the time of the Roman occupation, the invasion of the Franks, and the reign of Charles the Great, and his immediate heirs, 57 BC to 843 AD. 2. The period of feudalism. And 3. The rise of the communes, 11th to 14th century. 4. The political centralization of the Dukes of Burgundy, 15th century. 5. The Spanish rule, 16th to 17th century. 6. The Austrian rule, 18th century. 7. The French regime, 1792 to 1815. 8. The Dutch rule, and the Revolution of 1830. 9. The period of national independence. During all these periods of history, the names Belgium and Belgians have not been uniformly those by which the country and its people have been designated. The name Belgae of Celtic origin was given in Caesar's time to the confederation of Celtic tribes, which occupied the territory of Belgium, when for the first time the Roman legions came in contact with them. The name Belgium, Belgica, disappeared with the Roman occupation, and does not reappear until the 16th century. During the 16th century, and especially at the beginning of the 17th, the name Belgium is to be found in books, but seems not to have been used as a common designation. A distinctive name for a race or people, the term Belges became generally used at the end of the 18th century, its adjectival form being the Belgique, the Belgian provinces. Between the end of the Roman occupation and the end of the 18th century, the Belgians were successively known as Franks, Lotharingi, and Flemings since the 13th century. The country itself has been called Netherlands when the name Lotharingia disappeared as a political term. The term Burgundian provinces was sometimes used in the 15th century, while the name Flanders, Fiandre, Flandes, was mainly applied during the Spanish rule. During the Austrian rule, the name Austrian Netherlands was the prevailing destination. The term Netherlands was applied not only to the actual territory of Belgium, but to the countries which today correspond to the territories included in the kingdoms of Belgium and Holland. From the time of the Roman occupation until 1588, Belgium and Holland have indeed a somewhat common history. Since 1588, when the provinces of the north separated from the south as the United Provinces of the Netherlands, Belgium and Holland have existed as separate states and have no longer a common history. We shall not attempt to deal here with the history of the northern provinces from the early Middle Ages down to 1588, for that is the task of the historian of Holland, and although politically speaking, the provinces of Belgium and Holland both shared the same vicissitudes until 1588, yet, as has been pointed out by Professor Collenbrander, from the point of view of artistic, literary and economic life, the national culture of the two was quite distinct. On the other hand, included in this history is that of the Principality of Liege. Liege was never a part of the Netherlands until 1795. It was an ecclesiastical state with a separate entity, ruled by bishops, princes of the Holy Roman Empire. But Liege had a civilization, and especially institutions common to those of the other Belgian provinces, and geographically and historically speaking, it was really a part of Belgium. Having thus indicated what is to be dealt with in this short history of Belgium, it remains only to mention the bibliographical list appended at the close of the work, which includes the most important books on general Belgian history. A reference to these will facilitate a deeper understanding of the subject, and will enable the student to enter more in detail into the history of the country. Prefatory note to the second edition. The editors have urged me to add in this edition a final chapter on the history of Belgium during the Great War. These events, of course, do not yet belong to history, but it seems possible to give at least a brief sketch of what happened in Belgium during the invasion and the German occupation. The knowledge which we have acquired in the year that has elapsed since the armistice has enabled us to establish the facts. Chapter 1. The period of formation. When in 57 BC, the Roman Republic, then in control of most of the Mediterranean countries, the south of Gaul included, determined to conquer also the rest of that country, Belgium was occupied by the people of Celtic origin, called the Belgians, Belgae. They were a part of the larger group of the Gauls who possessed the country between the Pyrenees, the Alps, the Rhine, and the sea. The Belgians occupied not only the actual territory of Belgium, but also a part of northern France and of Rhenish Prussia. They formed a confederation of several tribes, among the Nervians dwelling in the provinces of Hainaut, Brabant, and Flanders were the most important. The Roman general Julius Caesar, entrusted with the task of subduing the north of Gaul, attacked the Belgians in 57 BC. The Roman army would have been routed by the Nervians in the first attack, but for Caesar, who himself led the troops and saved the day, notwithstanding a fierce guerrilla warfare that lasted 4 years. All the Belgian tribes were successively subdued, and some of them exterminated. Their heroic resistance made Caesar say of them, "Among all the Gauls, the bravest are the Belgians." Once subdued, Belgium accepted the Roman rule and remained loyal to the empire. Civilization was rapidly introduced. Great military roads were constructed through the Belgian forests and marshes, connecting the different towns, and along their course villages were built and farms developed. Tongres and Tournai became entirely Romanized cities, where splendid monuments were built. Remains of these are still to be found today. Farms were laid out and country houses were erected according to the Roman pattern, with such changes as were imposed by the rigours of the northern climate. The Belgians adopted Roman manners and customs and the Latin language. They became Gallo-Romans, and even the national gods were renamed with Roman names. If Belgium shared the splendour and the civilization of the Roman Empire, it shared also the disastrous days of its decline. There came a time when the empire, once so strong, but now growing weaker and weaker, was quite unable to resist the hordes of barbarians, which, coming from the dark forests of Germany, threatened the rich provinces of Gaul and Italy itself with invasion. From the 3rd century on, Franks and Alemanns devastated Gaul and left the wealthy territories covered with ruins. The emperors did not succeed in expelling the Franks from the country. Those tribes of Teutonic race were allowed to remain in the northern parts of Belgium, Flanders, and Champagne, and became soldiers of the empire. They early became dissatisfied with the territory allotted to them and resumed their march southward, conquering the whole of Belgium. The year 406 witnessed a terrible catastrophe. The Teutons, driven out of their country by the invasion of the Huns, burst like a hurricane upon the unfortunate provinces of Belgium, burned and devastated everything on their march, destroyed Tongres and Tournai, and finally, swarming over the Alps and the Pyrenees, invaded both Italy and Spain. After their passage, Belgium was left undefended by the Roman legions, recalled to defend Italy itself, and the Franks of Flanders and Champagne occupied the abandoned territory without difficulty. The conquest by the Franks is an important event in Belgian history. Indeed, it is from the 5th century that the bilingualism and the ethnographical dualism of Belgium may be said to date. The Franks, composed of 2 tribes, the Salians and the Ripuarians, advanced from the north and the east into Belgium, and occupied the country in such a way that the actual provinces of Flanders, Antwerp, Limburg, and the larger part of Brabant and Liege fell into their power. Farther south, they did not enter Belgium. Their march was stopped by a dense and extended forest, which, in southwestern and central Belgium, constituted the continuation of the forests of the Ardennes. The forest in question was called Silva Carbonaria, coal wood, and covered the largest part of the actual province in Hainaut, the seat of the modern Belgian coal industry. Behind the curtain of that forest, the oldest inhabitants of the country, the Gallo-Romans, remained free from oppression by the invaders and retained their Latin culture and civilization. So Belgium was separated by the Silva Carbonaria into two quite distinct parts. The northern part occupied by the Franks with their Teutonic culture and civilization, the southern part occupied by the Gallo-Romans. A line was thus drawn dividing the Belgian people, and an ethnical and linguistic duality, destined to remain for centuries one of the main characteristics of the country, was established. Indeed, the Walloons of today are the descendants of the old Gallo-Romans from behind the limits of the Silva Carbonaria, and the Flemings of northern Belgium are the descendants of the Franks. This line drawn in the 5th century has undergone little change in the course of ages, and although the famous Coalwood disappeared many centuries ago, the separation between Walloons and Flemings has remained more or less apparent down to the present. In this case, the Silva Carbonaria played a part like that of the Alps in the case of the Romanches, and the Italians of the Ticino, and that of the hills of Wales and Cornwall in the case of the Britons of England. The first king of the Franks known in history is Clodion, who conquered the countries of Tournai and Cambrai, and established the seat of his realm in Tournai. It is in this town, and his grave was discovered in 1653. The king was found buried according to the customs of his people, together with his arms and royal ornaments. He was identified by the presence of a ring, on which his likeness and his name were engraved. It was from Tournai that the famous descendant of Clodion, King Clodovech, started his campaign of further conquest that gave him possession of northern France, and after the war against the Burgundians and the West Goths in 506, the control of nearly the whole of their country. From this time on, the Frankish kings established their capital at Paris. Belgium is no longer associated with the recollection of their glorious deeds. Clodion and his successors, so far as we know by the general history of Europe, belonged to the so-called dynasty of the Merovingians. The kings of that dynasty, in the course of the 7th century, were weaklings, actually dominated by their powerful ministers, the mayors of the palace. One of these, Pepin in 751, succeeded in becoming himself a king and was the founder of a new royal dynasty, the Carolingians. The new dynasty was, geographically speaking, essentially a Belgian dynasty, for it had many possessions in eastern Belgium, and all its members had occupied influential offices at the court of the Austrasian kings, who in the 6th and 7th centuries ruled over that part of the country. The most famous of the Carolingians is Charles the Great, who re-established the old Roman Empire in 800, and who by successful campaigns succeeded in extending his domination over the territory lying between the River Elbe, the Bohemian Mountains, and the Raab on the east, the sea on the west, the North Sea, and the Garigliano River in Italy, and the Ebro River in Spain on the south. The favourite residence of the great emperor was Aix, and this contributed largely to the development of Belgian trade and industry at the beginning of the 9th century. Politically abandoned by the Frankish kings when they moved to Paris, Belgium again became important in the time of Charles the Great, as the most favourably located portion of the Frankish Empire. Belgium is indeed, for trade purposes, the natural meeting ground of the Western European nations. Lying between England, France, Germany, and Holland, it has good water communications with each other. Though not quite so near the English coast as a corner of France is, it has the great advantage of exactly fronting the mouth of the Thames. With France it is connected by the upper courses of the Lys, the Scheldt, the Sambre, and the Meuse, the last named being navigable by deep draught vessels far into Lorraine. With Germany its connection is less direct, the outlet of the Rhine running of course through Holland. These geographical conditions played a large part in the development of Belgian trade in the time of Charles the Great. The presence of the imperial palace at Aix attracted a great deal of traffic. From every part of the empire, merchants, soldiers, priests, in short all classes of people came through Belgium in order to reach the residence of the emperor, and their presence resulted in unparalleled prosperity in that part of the Carolingian Empire. Charles the Great was not only a great soldier and legislator, but also a man who knew the importance of the Christian religion in cultural matters. During his reign, the development of religious life in the different parts of the empire grew rapidly. Something ought to be said concerning the introduction of the Christian religion into Belgium. The preaching of the gospel in Belgium goes back as far as the Roman occupation of the time of the empire, but the religious organization of the church in the country dates from the middle of the 4th century. At that time, we find in the city of Tongres the oldest historically known bishop of Belgium, Saint Servatius. The historical origin of the bishoprics of Arras, Tournai, Boulogne, Cambrai, and all of them at the time in Belgian territory, remains a matter of conjecture. The baptism of King Chlodovich in 496 made the development of the Christian religion easier, although the conversion of the king to the Catholic faith did not at all mean the conversion of the whole people. Large parts of Belgium, especially the eastern part, remained heathen until the 8th century, and the introduction of the Christian religion in these sections of the country is mainly the work of missionaries. These missionaries worked on their own initiative without any such prearranged plan, as for instance existed for the introduction of Catholicism into England. It was mainly by Irish and Anglo-Saxon missionaries that the gospel was made known, and the most famous of those heralds of the Catholic religion was the Anglo-Saxon missionary Willibrord. The work of the missionaries was completed by the bishops, who visited large portions of their very extensive diocese. Bishops Eligius, Amandus, Lambert, and Hubert, are closely connected with the religious history of Belgium in the 7th and 8th centuries. The boundaries of the diocese corresponded exactly with the limits of the old administrative circles of the Roman Empire, the provinces. In the 8th century, Belgium was divided into the dioceses of Noyon-Tournai, Arras, Cambrai, Liège, and Utrecht. The dioceses of Utrecht and Liège were subject to the Metropolitan Church of Cologne, the others to the Metropolitan Church of Reims. These dioceses had been established without taking into account the racial differences existing between the inhabitants of the ecclesiastical territory, including in the same diocese Gallo-Romans and Franks. The Church, unconsciously of course, prepared the inhabitants of Belgium for the task of being intermediaries between the Latin and Teutonic civilization, the seats of the bishoprics being mostly located in the Romance section of the country. The inhabitants of the Teutonic section were obliged to meet the Walloons. They had the same religious centre. As a result of this action of the Church, the national or racial differences were diminished, and the linguistic frontier no more operated as a barrier, in any real sense, between the people it separated. And that concludes tonight's readings. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this story about Belgium. If you're not quite tired yet, you're always welcome to listen to another episode of the Boy to Sleep podcast. I'll be working on bringing you another episode very soon. Until next time, good night.